Hello, and welcome to the last edition of the first season of Questions for Lawyers. I'm your host, attorney Jeff Adelman, and what we've tried to do throughout this program is bring on people who, it's working okay? Good. Bring on people who do different areas of law and explain that to the general public because, as some of you know, we can handle any type of area of law according to the Florida bar, but that's not quite how it is. So today I have a very special guest talking about a very topical issue, marijuana legalization. And for all of you today, I bring on Michael Minardi from the Regulate Florida movement, and I welcome you to the show.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me, Jeff. It's great to see you and be here.
Well, thank you for coming in. I mean, you practice up in Tampa, so, I'm pretty honored that you're here in studio, but you are in South Florida for a reason.
Yep. I'm here for a cannabis conference this weekend, and, I still travel throughout this state regularly, and it's always good to catch up with an ex-law school buddy. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Class of 2002.
I
Nova.
know. Amazing. 17 years. I can't believe it.
It's pretty incredible, isn't it? But in any event, I've known you since law school, and this has always been an issue that you've been involved in. How did you get involved in the marijuana legalization movement?
Yeah, as it's out there, but it's really the reason why I went to law school. Was always that goal of legalizing and changing the laws. I used to have a bumper sticker that said, stay in school, learn the system, then change it. And that's what we've been doing for the past 20 years. So, really, I read the book by Jack Harrow when I was in high school called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And it was about hemp and how hemp became illegal. And really marijuana as well as hemp, the substance we use is the street drug. And that's really where it all started, in really learning about the hypocrisy of the American government, why they really made it criminalized. It was also the same time, which ironically, American Made came out a couple years ago, with Tom Cruise, and that movie is about what I was watching in the late 80s. Was the Nicaragua-Contra affairs. And I was watching this stuff on C-SPAN, the CIA hearings and stuff like that in Congress, listening to these members of the CIA acknowledge that, hey, yeah, we knew drugs were coming in, but it didn't matter because they were buying weapons from us. So that all really culminated in my, number one, disdain and understanding that our government was corrupt and didn't do what they said. And, I'm an attorney, and the reason why I became an attorney was very much because I'm Italian. So my family, I'd argue with everybody. They said, you're going to be the mafia lawyer. It kind of planted that seed in my mind. And, I went for it, and we've made it, and we've done, honestly, more than I ever expected in this industry. So,
well, it's funny. My first exposure to the fact that anything that marijuana was bad was a friend of mine in college showed me the Reefer Madness movie. People just going smoking marijuana and all of a sudden jumping up on tables and acting crazy. And once I saw that, I'm like, maybe there's a little bit more to this than I'm being told.
Yeah, and that's been revisited in some reports by some anti-prohibitionists, the people that are against this, have come out with reports again, in our legislature tried to do it this session, limit the amount of THC in the flower for the medical patients. In the flower, not the concentrates or anything like that, just the flower products, because they were worried that higher concentrations of THC could make people have psychosis and go insane. Basically back to the Reefer Madness days. But again, so that was the flower products, but not the concentrate products, which have 85% THC in them. So it was very ironic, and our government and our legislature has no clue what they're doing up there or anything about this plant, honestly. It's sad.
Well, you're really at the forefront of Florida, and I know that there's people like you throughout the country. Where do things stand right now throughout the United States in terms of places where it is legal recreationally and then legal from a medicinal purpose?
So we have 11 states now in this country that are legal for recreational purposes. Illinois became the second state and the first large state in the country to pass it through the legislature. The other one was Vermont. And we see more states potentially moving towards that. And really the reason is because they continue to do these studies and reports and see what the economic benefits versus criminalization versus legalization is. And legalization continues to win out. New York's reports went out. New Hampshire's reports went out. And we're seeing, state after state, the information coming out of there being very positive for the result of legalization not having this detrimental effect that they're all afraid of. And now as far as medical, we're in about 39 states right now with medical.
39 states?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's amazing.
That's more than I thought, for sure.
It is. And it's really just the pocket of the middle. And Missouri just went, and Oklahoma, and 2 years ago, I was representing a veteran over there who's facing 2 to life for 5 plants in Oklahoma. They now have one of the most liberal medical marijuana programs in the country.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. Yeah. So you travel throughout the country, advocating.
Yeah, I've done about a handful of cases throughout the country in other states, Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, because again, I luckily created a niche in this industry and what I've done in a medical necessity defense, and also now defending parents with chemotherapy or parents who are using cannabis for medical cases, for their medical, uses with children and those issues. We have a lot of issues like that, but I go where I have to in order to help people. I believe in this cause. I know it's the right thing. I believe in 5-10 years, and as we continue to show, as more states legalize it, we're on the right side of history with this. There's absolutely no doubt about it. On the medical side, we're saving people's lives. The amount of calls that I get over the past 15 or 10 years, really, since I've been really into it, of people thanking us for what we're doing or telling us their story about the medical benefits that they've had has been, inspiring. And it definitely puts me in a position where it's not something that I can stop until this is done.
Well, you mentioned that you've kind of created a niche. How did you go about doing that? Is kind of becoming the go-to guy? I mean, your practice, you do criminal defense, correct?
And I really don't do much criminal defense anymore. So realistically, when I first came out of law school, it was my number one goal and always was. And I knew, and ironically, the law review article I did for Nova in law school was on this issue. And it was on the 3 issues of how to change the laws here in the state of Florida. And those were ballot initiatives, which regulate Florida's, which I'm doing right now. Court challenges, which the medical necessity defense does, as well as I filed motions to dismiss to say that, hey, it's unconstitutional to have cannabis as a Schedule I substance. And number 3, through the legislature, and we're lobbying and we're doing a lot with the legislature this year in attempting to change those laws, and last year and the past couple of years to continue to push them to continue to reform and open it up for patients. So realistically, that was set in my mind when I started, and after I got out and started practicing and felt like I had the ability to really expand, I started looking for a medical necessity case and starting taking these, and then that's really when it happened where I broke through, got the first ever not guilty verdict on a medical necessity trial with a client had 48 plants. He was a 53-year-old man with anorexia.
That got a lot of press, actually.
Got national press. It was, I was second in a couple of magazines for the most historic pot victory of the year that year. And that's really what allowed my practice to focus and to center on cannabis only. And then as the laws started to change and people wanted to get into the business and the industry of cannabis and CBD and hemp, because I know all those issues and I've been studying it, we've moved into that. So we do a lot of business startup issues for CBD, and I represent a bunch of the clients that are part of the lawsuits fighting the legislature and the Department of Health right now with the medical marijuana laws who are trying to get licensed. And then we represent a lot of hemp CBD companies. And that is right now both on the criminal side and on the business side, unfortunately, as this program continues to develop and law enforcement continues to be educated. Because that's really the biggest problem we're having here right now. Even patients here in the state of Florida are still getting arrested because cops are ignorant of the law.
Let me ask you this, because I think that there is some confusion out there about CBD oils. Like, I feel like everybody's selling them these days. I go into the gas station, I can go buy CBD oils. Are they legal in Florida?
That depends on who you're asked. So my position is absolutely.
Okay.
And ironically, and I've been fighting it, we have a lawsuit up in Melbourne. We have filed a lawsuit against the Melbourne city, the police there for arresting and seizing items, CBD and hemp items. And in Florida, the issue is this. Our law enforcement says, hey, listen, we don't have hemp yet. You can't ship hemp, etc. And so therefore it's cannabis once it enters Florida if it tests positive for THC. And my position is, and this to me is one of the best law school essay exams you could have, is, the question of is it or is not legal. My analysis of the federal hemp bill and the 2014 and 2018 hemp bill is, hey, listen, the federal government preempted this area of space. I'm sorry, states. Screw you. You can only give that authority that the federal government grants you. And in this sense, my perspective is that the federal government, even with the new farm bill, has only granted the authority to the states to regulate production. The new federal farm bill specifically states that states cannot interfere with the interstate commerce of these products.
Sure.
And it says that
this is basic law school. You
can't interfere with shipping across state lines. So that really becomes the question that I'm a firm believer in. Ironically, it's great sometimes, when you argue something for years. The USDA attorney for the general counsel for the USDA came out with an opinion on May 29th that basically quotes pretty much everything that I've been saying for the last 2 years with regards to the legality of these products, both under the 2014 Farm Bill, which created a research pilot programs, but also the federal government, and I was talking to my fiance last night about it, but created these budget amendments. And this happened yesterday in the House, which I'll talk about in a second.
Sure.
But so in addition to the hemp bill, when they passed the hemp bill for cultivation of hemp, the federal government also passed 2 riders on the omnibus budget amendment. So budget everyone talks about, the government's going to shut down. These are funding mechanisms.
Sure.
And for a while now, they have, and I want to say 2012, 2013 it originally passed, but they created riders saying that the Department of Justice, the DEA cannot interfere with these products, basically. So the feds have been defunded from interfering in that same aspect. And that's why medical marijuana states throughout this country have really had no issue of the federal government interfering, because that same rider also applied in different sections, totally separate section than the 2 hemp ones, to medical marijuana states, basically saying the Department of Justice cannot use any funds to interfere with people and operators who are compliant in medical marijuana states. Just yesterday, sorry, I just want to get to this.
Oh, sure.
Just yesterday, our our Democrat-led House, just added to that rider legal states for legalization, which would be the first time ever, which is absolutely enormous. So, and I've been saying this for a while. I'm like, well, if the Attorney General wanted to do anything, he couldn't do anything with medical because, and this is back in the Jeff Sessions days when he was crazy, they're just as bad as cocaine and heroin and stuff. But he couldn't.
He saw the Reefer Madness
He
movie.
didn't have the money. Yeah, right. Too many times. He didn't have the money to go after medical states. But technically, at that time, when he was making all those threats, he could have went after Colorado and those other states that were legal, and they didn't. And now this new rider is going to prevent them from doing so. So this movement is continuing, to progress both on the state and federal level. And as we know, almost every Democratic candidate who's running for president all supports legalization. And Trump just came out with a sort of a positive saying he has never said anything realistically other than states' rights. So, and all my Republican lobbyists believe he's going to be campaigning potentially on a legalization next year.
That's interesting. I don't see why he wouldn't, to be honest with you.
It's stupid.
Well, so in Florida, just getting back to the CBD, do you see law enforcement really enforcing this at this point, or is it just isolated incidents more so?
It is isolated incidents. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be random BS. Mm-hmm. One of my clients, allegedly they called because someone came in and robbed the store. And so the cops came and they saw the hemp flower. And unfortunately, in hemp flower, does look a lot like cannabis. There's really not much of a difference. You can't
Really?
tell the difference unless you know realistically. And I don't even know if someone brought up a hemp flower and a cannabis flower to me. I don't know if I'd be able to tell the difference now with what they're doing and how they're trimming it and
That's
cultivating
interesting.
it.
Yeah.
The terpene profiles, meaning the smells and the odors come from it, are the same. So it is very difficult for them. I absolutely understand that. It was really a reason why the DEA had been lobbying against hemp for so long, because it looks too much like cannabis, and they can't differentiate. And we don't have the testing. So the problem, and the biggest problem is number one, they still think it's cannabis in Florida because, number one, we don't have a hemp program. And from their position, it's not, the 2018 Farm Bill, which legalized it. No one has grown under that. So therefore the products that come in aren't legal under that. And that's a totally different situation. It's a much longer argument dealing with the legalization under the 2014 bill. But roadsides. So a law enforcement officer pulls someone over with a hemp oil or anything CBD.
Sure.
A lot of these are called full spectrum oils. So there's basically two different types. There's a full spectrum oil, which contains whole plant, which does have under the 0.3% THC in it. Right. And then you have isolate, which would have no THC in it at all. But so when they test any of those products or the hemp flower, because all the hemp flower has some THC in it, it tests positive for THC because their test only does positive or negative. There's no, percentage of THC. So that's the real big problem that we have. But most of these are isolated incidents where cops seemingly go to stores for other reasons and or maybe get complaints and then end up in a bust. I do think, unfortunately, since some of our comments from our Commissioner of Agriculture and their statements on their website, it has given law enforcement the courage to arrest more of these people than they were doing before. We've had 2 arrests.
And that's surprising, actually, with Nikki Fried, to be honest with you.
It is. And, I've had some conversations with her about it. And her position is, that's how she believes and she reads the statute. And I know she wants to create her own program here. But she is hurting a lot of the people that supported her as a result. One of the worst stories we have, and it was actually here in Palm Beach, and one of the biggest busts and seizures was here in Broward not too long ago, where a guy called us. We don't represent him at this point, but allegedly had like $2 to $4 million worth retail value of products seized by the Broward Sheriff's Office. So these issues, and it's really education among law enforcement from my perspective. The lawsuit like we have in Melbourne to clarify for these people that you cannot stop the interstate commerce of these products. They sell it on Amazon, and it's really not fair to people, honestly, because everyone promotes it, all the producers, all the manufacturers. Online you see it. Forbes had articles like hemp is legal, blah, 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 and then local law enforcement are arresting people for it. It is really, really sad to me. So the guy in Palm Beach, literally, he was a 65-year-old man, basically, and this is the saddest thing about majority of people who get into this. They get into it because they had an illness or something like that they started using it for that helped them. And so they decided they want to bring that to other people because of what they've gotten out of it. And so this guy, he had a pacemaker. They raided him. They took everything in his store, cash registers, all his CBD oils, all his CBD flour. And that's a big difference depending on what county you're in. The oils may be okay, but the flour's not. Even though they're all the same product. But this guy ended up dying as complications from that raid. He had a heart attack at the raid because it was stressful from him. He ended up having complications for 3-4 months after that and then passed away from complications of this raid as a result of,
sad.
A 65-year-old woman, a man, really, don't you really, with all the issues that are going around in this state, in this country, with the shootings that we're having and stuff, you're arresting a 60-year-old man who's selling CBD flower and hemp that can't get anyone high. And ironically, my position is the hemp flower is probably the thing right now that should be the clearest as the most legal. Because the federal farm bill, what it did do is it legalized hemp products, but it did give authority to the FDA to regulate food, drug, cosmetic, anything for human consumption. Hemp flower is something that people smoke, right?
Right.
That's not in that purview of the FDA. So, and that's why we filed this lawsuit, and we're probably going to end up filing another one in Hillsborough County with regards to the hemp issue specifically.
And it's very, unsettled from county to county. I mean, like right now in Miami, you get a civil citation for marijuana.
Okay, well, now you're talking differently. That's not hemp at all, or
Okay.
CBD. So that's decriminalization
Right.
of marijuana.
Can you talk a little bit
20%.
about that? Because in South Florida, I know in the Tri-County area, it's different depending on what county you're in. And I'm sure it's similar up in Tampa.
Well, what counties and what states and cities. So this is something that people can actually do a little bit more easily, is get a local county commissioner or local municipality to create an ordinance. So they have the authority to create ordinances about misdemeanors in order to decriminalize. So cannabis under 20 grams is a misdemeanor. So there has been, I think, probably about a half a dozen at least now that have decriminalized cannabis. So you have Miami, Broward, Palm Beach, Tampa, the city has decriminalized it. I want to say Volusia has decriminalized it. In one of the areas, I think Seminole or one of those areas around
That's all
Orlando,
just happened recently, hasn't it?
within the last year.
Mhm.
And decriminalization is specifically, under 20 grams, the officer in most of the areas has the authority to, and all the little ordinances are a little bit different, to write a citation, meaning more like a traffic ticket for under 20 grams, as opposed to a criminal infraction. So it's huge. It goes a long way. And, obviously, I don't know, and you talked about criminal court and how much you're in criminal court, but we'll sit around for hours in criminal court and see person after person in misdemeanor court for possession of cannabis, and the most interesting thing about it, it's kind of like DUIs, I think, in that it creates and it affects all socioeconomic statuses. So you get your college kids and you get your 60-year-old, adults that are like going on probation because they're smoking weed. It's like, come on. It's ridiculous. And, and I can see that this continuing to be an issue, especially among older people, in that I've represented a bunch of seniors, honestly, and most of my medical marijuana patients and clients have been all 45 plus. They're not the kids and stuff like that. It's a lot of these 40 plus year olds. And they're, ironically, the largest increase in population use in this country isn't teens, but it's seniors. 45 plus.
That's interesting, but not surprising.
Not at all.
The climate right now.
Well, and and one of the comments we get from them is that they've all been through every prescription medication. They've had the side effects, and they'll try anything at this point. And as we go and realize pretty much all of New England is legal now. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire is medical, and they're toying with legalization. But, those are the people that spend half of the year down here, and they're going to want their medicine. That's another problem.
That's a real consideration for Florida. The snowbirds that are used to using it up north, and do you want to dissuade people from coming down here?
And we don't have reciprocity in our program here. And reciprocity is basically, for example, Washington, D.C., right? You can have your medical card here in Florida, and you can walk into any of the medical dispensaries in Washington, D.C. and buy whatever you want, right? Reciprocity. We don't have that here in Florida, and I think it's a huge disservice. Number one, to our people. Number two, I think it's unconstitutional based on what our amendment says, and this is another great law school question. So Amendment 2, when they passed it, they said any person can be a patient by seeing a doctor, right? And there's another section that says any citizen can file a lawsuit to compel the department to comply with this. And so our position is, and this lawsuit hasn't been done yet, unless the legislature changes. I think at one point it will, because a huge difference in our patient base and the amount of people that can be patients if we can open that up to tourists. But I think that there's a clear difference in that language that they talk about a person can be a patient and a citizen can sue. And as we know, we've learned since law school, as to why illegal immigrants have rights and things like that when they get here is because they're people, not citizens, but they can't vote. So I think there's still a lot of lawsuits that have to be dealt with and done. We've actually filed Nova. We've sued Nova.
Oh, wow.
We filed a lawsuit against them.
That must have been fun.
It is fun, and it's very interesting, and it's also disheartening, in that, number one, I think that the attorneys that they have don't know what they're talking about with regards to this respect. But we had a nursing student who was, and it was covered by Miami New Times and a couple other outlets, who was expelled for testing positive as a medical cannabis patient. And we do believe our amendment protects medical cannabis patients for using off-site their medicine. And so we're pushing that. We're probably going to be suing the Hillsborough County soon for a firefighter that's been fired, threatened, put through these drug-free workplace programs as a result of testing positive for being a patient.
So you handle cases throughout the state of Florida, then?
Yeah.
I mean, because you're talking about Broward County, you're talking about up in the Hillsborough County. I mean, you're throughout the state of Florida.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you were mentioning the reciprocity. I couldn't help but think about the Florida bars kind of the same way.
Yeah.
Like they don't really accept anybody from outside of Florida.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want somebody from New York coming down here and hanging out a shingle. It's been like that forever. And I remember there was a movement to try to get that done years ago. It went nowhere.
Absolutely nowhere.
So,
yeah, no, we like to, and that's the one thing about both legislatively, I think, is Florida likes to keep its own and do its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone's like, why don't we just copy this state's medical program, or why don't we just look at what they did? And I'm like, well, because we're in Florida.
Yeah, they don't do it like that in Florida. But let me bring some things up to you that are concerns that some people who are not for legalization of marijuana have brought up to me. And one of the things is DUI.
Yep.
I mean, you can certainly be driving a vehicle impaired from marijuana. And how does law enforcement deal with that issue?
So I just did a clip with Bay News 9 yesterday about this issue, because there was a new study that came out that said that, X amount of people admit to driving within a 1 hour of smoking. So this is the issue. And number one is we have to first get around the reality. And this is what I said. Number one, adults have to be responsible adults. They have to understand what they can and cannot control. And this is what I said to her. Some of these things didn't make the air, but okay, go around and ask people how many people drive within an hour of having a drink of alcohol. And I guarantee you that rate is going to be, never mind on Fridays after happy hour, right? It's common. You remember in law school, everybody pretty much on Fridays used to go out, have drinks.
The old Falcon pub.
And leave, right.
Free plug.
Free plug, no advertising. When you used to go out, even when I was a young attorney across the street, we used to hang out with all the public defenders and all the state attorneys. Everyone would go out drinking on Fridays after, Thursdays after. 1 or 2 drinks, and everyone would drive home. No one thought the issue of it. So that's number one, and we have to put it into this. Number two, people are doing this already, illegally. Using cannabis and driving, and we don't see any sort of increase in traffic fatalities. Now, the metadata analysis in the studies, and it was Irvin Ruick, I believe he is. He's a University of Oslo professor. He's done one of the most comprehensive metadata analysis studies on cannabis and driving, and he ended up comparing it to, it's really the difference between driving at night and driving in the daytime.
Right.
The other studies have basically shown that, cannabis has very little effect on the driver compared to alcohol and other substances.
So there's different types of impairment. There's alcohol impairment compared to marijuana impairment, and just, I guess, dealing with different areas of the brain.
And all different parts of drugs as well. And so most studies do confirm that cannabis impairment, and this is different from new users versus people who've been using for a longer period of time. So, it affects new users more, and they may have more issues, but as people use more, they become more accustomed to it. It affects them differently. You don't get as high, you get more normal as our endocannabinoid system cuts out. So realistically, what they've equivalized, under the influence of cannabis is about a 0.01 to 0.05 BAC level on that level. So in no state in the country is that illegal.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
0.01 to 0.05. So that really becomes the question. And realize our current laws wouldn't change at all. We still currently have, and DUI means driving under the influence of alcohol to the extent 0.08, or to the extent your normal faculties are impaired under any controlled substance. We had a judge in Palm Beach, Sam Broward, within the last 5 years get busted. One of them, I think, had Ambien in their system. I
remember that very well.
And another one, I don't remember what she had in her system, but something. So it's really no different than anything else.
Prescription medication.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can take an opiate and drive, and really, and as it says on the bottle, figure out how this affects you before you operate heavy machinery and stuff like that. So I think it's two things. It's number one, it's education of people. and understanding as to what they shouldn't do. And don't get me wrong, there's a huge difference between smoked flower and whether or not they're smoking it and whether or not someone's taking an edible as well. Those are different things that our population has to be educated on, and people being responsible. We all have the ability. And to me, when I first moved to Florida, I thought this was amazing. Even though we have like New Hampshire state liquor stores off our highways that you could buy like a cold beer in a convenience store, a single cold beer. I don't see any purpose from buying a single cold beer when you're driving except to drink it. Like the thought of like, I'm going to buy a single cold beer and then bring it home to drink it.
That's interesting. I never really thought it's not like that in other states.
No, not at all. And I just, and to me, it's like we proliferate and push alcohol and tobacco so much, when we have something that has such, for 5,000 plus years it's been used, it's still responsible for 0 deaths, and we know why it can't kill people, so when you're looking at tobacco, which kills 400 plus thousand people a year, including my mom died of lung cancer, you have alcohol that kills 20,000 people approximately from physical illness or disease as a result from the alcohol, and then another 20 plus thousand that die from DUIs as a result of alcohol. And I think it's one of the interesting statistics that they've come out with in Colorado that show that traffic fatalities have actually went down in Colorado since legalization.
That's very important right there.
And they do believe that it could be a potential because people are drinking less.
And that certainly would be a real positive.
But most of the studies do show that, it's not as dangerous as we think it is, and as a lot of the legalization people are making it out to be. And they're the same ones that say that it cause people to go crazy and have psychosis or anything like that. And no study has created a causal link on that. They say the same thing, like people with depression and mental illness use tobacco more. They use alcohol more, so to say that they're using cannabis, and a lot of these people are self-medicating, is that makes them crazy is a far stretch what these people are trying to do.
Well, personally, I spoke with a friend recently who has taken Ambien, all the different sleep medications. He just got a medical marijuana card in Florida. He said that, he would wake up in the morning when he would take this medication. He'd be grumpy, he'd be everything else. And then he would smoke some of the medical marijuana before he went to bed. He'd wake up, he'd feel refreshed. He said that, it's been a life-changing thing for him. And I imagine it's been like that for a lot of other people since those cards have been available in Florida.
Well, it is. And it's, and all those people that were fighting for it before it. And that's why we saw 71% pass it. And that Ambien issue, and it's interesting because when you get into this and you learn really what's going on, Ambien, it's called the fugue state, right? And so Ambien fought, and a lot of these companies fight for years to get these really detrimental side effects kept off their labels. So Ambien is now known to cause a fugue state. So basically you can take it, and if you don't go to bed immediately, you basically are blacked out. So I've had 2 clients that took Ambien and ended up in DUIs, and no idea how they got there. Ended up in a police department or in a hospital. All of a sudden waking up, how did I get here? What happened? The last thing I remember, I was cleaning my house. And it's 4 a.m, and you have this. One of the, as we were talking about, judges had this. I believe there was a politician on a mass that got in an accident that really kind of blew that story up. But that's what Ambien can do. There's also accidental overdoses with those types of things because same issue, you take it, you wake up in the middle of the night, you either forget you take it or you don't know what's going on and you take more. And cannabis is safe. It's from the plant. It's from the earth. It's something that in its natural form is really, according to a DEA judge in the early 1990s, said it's one of the safest therapeutic substances known to man. Lethal dosage rating, which they compare, prescription medications and stuff, it doesn't even fit on the same chart as our prescription medications.
That's one of the most important stats there is right there. Well, Michael, I can't thank you enough for coming on here. If people want to get more information about you and about the cause, how can they do that?
Well, so Minardi Law, you can go to Minardi Law, MINARDILAW.com. If you want to get involved in the cause, we need time, talents, and treasures. I mean, people helping us get signatures, talents, if you have any that can help us out, either marketing or design, or if you have a print shop or anything like that, and treasures. We need money. This is just like any other political campaign. It costs cash. We're probably going to need about $5 to $10 million to complete this thing over the next year and a half. That includes the political campaign as well. But we need you. We need everyone who supports this issue to get involved and get active. Call your legislators. Let them know that you support this issue, because hearing from you both on the state and federal level does make an impact on them. And get involved. RegulateFlorida.com. You can find out about events we have throughout the state on a regular basis, like the one that we're doing here this weekend. It's education on hemp. It's a huge new industry that they're creating rules on that, I expect realistically to probably be, a multi-trillion-dollar industry once it's full out, as we were talking about before.
Yeah, within the next 10 years, I would think.
Hemp is something that could be for biofuel eventually. We have our plastics. We have, feed for animals. We have clothing. We have hempcrete as well, which is to build houses out of. You can build a house out of 3 acres of hemp by making hempcrete, and it's stronger, more durable, and mold resistant than concrete. So I encourage people to get involved in this practice right now for business. If you're on the litigation side, the criminal side, we can help people. We consult with attorneys throughout the state on these issues. I love to have more people involved in this issue and educated and attorneys doing it, because the more that we are, the stronger presence that we can have, the more that we can fight, the more that we can, and I'm sick of hearing people call me and having their attorneys tell them that they got busted or they had hemp on them, and their attorneys telling them it's a gray area and it's illegal, and don't fight for this, fight for your rights. We do have federal hemp laws which have legalized it, and you should have a right to be able to use that here in this state now. So get involved and get active and get educated. That's the most important thing. That's why we all went to law school, so that we could be intelligent, and we know that it doesn't stop in this practice. The best thing that I love about this practice is that we continue to learn. We have to learn in order to keep ahead of the curve in this issue and to really do our job. And so it never becomes mundane or boring, because something new, no matter whether or not it be a DUI and 2 criminal cases or a slip and fall, the same thing, nothing is ever the same. There's always different facts, always different parties involved. But we need everybody's help. So please join us at RegulateFlorida.com or MinardiLaw.com. We have email lists that you can sign up for. And please let us spread the word. And thank you so much for having me. And
absolutely. It was great seeing you.
It's nice to see you as well.
Glad to see you here. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing on behalf of people that really need it or looking for alternatives, who can't find it in other ways and are finding relief through cannabis. So I appreciate everything that you're doing for all of us throughout the state. Thank you to all of you who have been loyal watchers, listeners. All of this will be available on Apple Podcast, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We've got it all there. And this has been so much of a pleasure for me to come to you and talk to you about different areas of law. I want to thank my paralegal, Sophia Aponte, for making sure that everything is going smoothly on these shows. Whenever there was a blip or anything like that, it was usually my fault, but I appreciate that very much. She's been wonderful. If you ever have any questions or need to reach me, my email address is jeff@edelmanlawyers.com. My phone number is 954-341-2777. I'm available to talk at any time about any legal issues. Thank you, everybody, and have a great summer.